Hello, my friend. My name is Dr. Robert Ellis. I'm 87 years old, and if you've found yourself reading these words, there's a good chance you're walking a path not so different from mine. The winding road of aging, where memories blur, thoughts slow, and quiet fears rise about the day we might no longer recognize the person in the mirror. I've been in medicine for over 60 years, and even now I still wake up at 5 a.m. every morning to read medical journals, practice a little piano, and ask myself one simple question: what can I learn today? You see, I may be old in years, but my brain, it still dances like it's 25. Not because I'm special, but because I never stop asking it to. When I was a young medical student back in the 1950s, we were told something that at the time no one dared to question. We were taught that the brain, once fully formed in adulthood, could no longer regenerate, that it was in essence a fixed structure, like a porcelain dish that if cracked could never truly be repaired. I believed that for decades. I taught it to my students. I treated patients through the lens of that belief. And then, life humbled me. I watched my own mentor, a man with a mind like a steel trap and a memory so precise he could recite obscure Latin diagnoses without blinking, slowly dissolve into confusion. Alzheimer's. A brilliant professor, the kind who once stood in front of lecture halls and illuminated minds, now unable to remember his own name just months after the diagnosis. I remember the way he looked at me one afternoon, his eyes searching mine like a man lost in his own house. That moment broke something in me, but it also opened a door, a question, a search. I no longer wanted to accept what the textbooks told me. I wanted to understand. Not with data alone, but with real human lives. So I began to study the brain not just as an organ, but as something alive, something that responds, adapts, and yes, something that can grow even in old age. And here is the truth I found again and again, both in science and in the faces of my patients. The brain does not deteriorate because of age. It deteriorates because we stop using it. It's not time that dulls us. It's routine. It's resignation. It's the silent, invisible moment when someone says to themselves, "I'm too old to change." That's the turning point, not the 70th birthday, not retirement, not even the first senior discount. It's that quiet giving up. That's when the brain begins to dim. But the opposite is also true. The moment you whisper to yourself, "I still have more to learn," something extraordinary begins to happen. The mind stirs, new connections attempt to form, hope slips in through the cracks. You see, the brain is not a candle slowly burning out. It's more like a garden. If you stop tending to it, it withers, but if you water it, plant something new, pull out the weeds of doubt, even after a lifetime of neglect, things begin to grow again, slowly, stubbornly, beautifully. And that realization became the foundation of my life's work. I stopped telling patients what they couldn't do. I started asking them what they still wanted to do. And from that place, the place of quiet longing, I watched miracles unfold. Let me tell you what I've seen. Because once you hear these stories, you might start to believe it too, that change isn't a young person's privilege. It's a human right, no matter how many candles are on your birthday cake. Her name was Mrs. Thompson, though she insisted I call her Eleanor. She was 84 when her daughter brought her to my office, quiet and withdrawn, her hands clutched tightly around her purse as though it held the last thread of who she was. Her memory had been slipping for years, her daughter said. Lately, she'd been forgetting the names of her grandchildren, repeating objects in the refrigerator, and repeating the same question 5 times in an afternoon. The neurologist before me had given her a clinical diagnosis, early-stage cognitive decline bordering on dementia. The words hit her like a soft death sentence. Not painful, but final. She'd stopped going to church. She no longer picked up the phone. She'd begun to fade quietly, as though rehearsing her own disappearance. I remember sitting across from her, watching her eyes scan the room, restless and unsure, and I remember thinking, this woman is not gone. She is waiting for someone to believe she is still here. I didn't offer her pills, not yet. Instead, I asked her about her past. Did you ever knit? Her eyes lit up, just a flicker, and she nodded. Every winter, she said, I made scarves for the whole family. That was enough for me to begin. I sent her home with a little routine, nothing extraordinary, 15 minutes a day of knitting, a stack of flashcards with simple words on them, a few mental math puzzles. I encouraged her to call her granddaughter every evening, even if just to say hello. But what if I forget what we talked about, she asked. Then you forget, I told her gently, but still talk. At her 3-month follow-up, she walked in straighter. Her voice was firmer. Her test scores showed something I rarely saw at that stage. Not just a halt in decline, but improvement. Her daughter was speechless. She remembered my birthday, she whispered. She hasn't remembered in years. 6 months in, the MRI confirmed what I already suspected. The hippocampus, the area of her brain responsible for memory, showed renewed activity. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and it was hers. Not from medication, not from miracle cures, from knitting, from flashcards, from human contact, from being invited back into her own life. You see, the brain had not abandoned Eleanor. It had simply been waiting to be asked to come alive again. She told me once, a year later, when she came in wearing a bright red scarf she had knit herself, "Dr. Ellis, I thought I was fading away, but it turns out I just needed someone to call me back." I carry her story with me because it's not just hers. It belongs to every person who has ever felt their minds slipping, their name becoming distant, their days blending into one another, and it reminds me every single day of a truth I now hold more dearly than anything I was ever taught in school. We are not made of years. We are made of attention, of effort, of the belief that something inside us still wants to grow. And when you give the brain something to reach for, no matter how small, it reaches back. Lillian was 80 when her daughter brought her to me. A retired librarian, no husband, no children of her own, apart from a niece who visited on holidays. She wore beige from head to toe and spoke so softly I had to lean in to hear her. She wasn't losing her memory, not in the way some of my other patients were. What she was losing was color, emotion, life. Her daughter said she had barely smiled in years. She slept more than she was awake, ate only when prompted. Her words were few, and her gaze seemed permanently fixed on something just beyond the room, as though she were already halfway gone. On her chart we wrote a word I've always disliked: depression, because it feels clinical, cold, like a diagnosis you pin to someone's shirt without asking what broke them. But when I spoke with her, slowly, carefully, as one might speak with a bird perched on their palm, she told me something that stayed with me. "I used to love music," she whispered, eyes downcast. "I would listen to Chopin on the radio and imagine my hands dancing across the keys. But I never learned to play. I was always too busy or too scared. That was all I needed. Would you try now?" I asked. "At 80, she said, and for the first time in the entire appointment, I saw the corner of her mouth twitch, a nearly invisible smile. The following week, I had a small electric keyboard delivered to her home. Nothing fancy, just enough to begin, and I gave her the most modest of tasks. Use one finger, just one, to tap out the melody of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The first week it took her 7 days to find the right notes. The second week she could play the whole thing without stopping. The third week she added her left hand, and somewhere between that first note and the third week, she started humming again. Her niece called me 2 months in and said, "I don't know what's happening, but she's cooking again, she's setting the table." She even sang happy birthday to me with a little flourish at the end. At her 6-month follow-up, Lillian sat down at the keyboard in my exam room and played a simple waltz, hands trembling, eyes sparkling, and when she finished, she turned to me and said, "It's not perfect, but it's mine." What she didn't know was that her scans told their own version of the story. New neural pathways had blossomed in the prefrontal and temporal lobes. regions tied to creativity, memory, emotion. Her brain had responded to the music not as a passive listener, but as a partner in creation. Even more remarkable than the neuroscience was the way her face had changed. Gone was the gray flatness of despair. In its place was a woman reclaiming her own rhythm, one note at a time. That's the thing about the human spirit. It doesn't always need grand gestures or sweeping change. Sometimes it just needs permission. A door left ajar, a melody to follow home. Lillian reminded me that it's never too late to touch the part of ourselves we once silenced, and that even after years of quiet, a single song, especially one played with trembling hands, can call a soul back into the body. You see, after all these years, all the patience, all the charts and scans, what I've come to believe most deeply is this: the brain does not ask for much. It doesn't require a genius IQ or expensive technology to stay young. What it needs, more than anything, is to be invited. Every day, just a little. There are 5 habits I often recommend to my older patients, not because they are dramatic, but precisely because they are small enough to be kept. They do not require equipment or training, only willingness. First, read something strange, something imaginative. The more illogical, the better. Fairy tales, science fiction, children's stories, anything that nudges the mind out of its comfort zone. You see, the brain lights up in wondrous ways when it encounters the unfamiliar, not just the language centers, but the parts responsible for sensation, movement, emotion. When you read about someone running through the woods, your motor cortex flares. When a character feels sorrow, your own brain mirrors it. It is not passive reading, it is immersive rehearsal for life. Second, change your environment. Sit in a different chair. Take your tea on the balcony instead of the kitchen. Write your grocery list in the park. The brain loves novelty. It doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't need to move to Paris, but even slight changes in environment shake it gently awake. A new scent, a new light, a different pattern in the day, all of it matters. Third, walk. 20 minutes. Every day, not as punishment, not to burn calories, but to oxygenate the very organ that defines your every memory, every dream, every decision. Walking increases blood flow to the hippocampus, helps stimulate the growth of new neural cells, and, perhaps most beautifully, offers rhythm. The left-right cadence soothes the nervous system like a lullaby for the body. Fourth, speak to yourself aloud. Say it clearly. I can still learn. I am not done yet. It might feel foolish, but the brain does not distinguish between your voice and someone else's. When it hears you affirm your own potential, it begins to rewire itself around that belief. You are not merely thinking, you are programming. And finally, breathe deeply for 5 minutes every morning. Do not underestimate this. Stress over time shrinks the hippocampus. Cortisol floods the brain and steals from memory, sleep, and joy. But breath, long, steady, intentional breath, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, lowers cortisol, and reminds your brain that it is safe, that it can grow. I have taught these 5 habits to hundreds, maybe thousands of patients over the years. And what I've learned is this: the miracle is not in doing them all perfectly. It is in starting. It is in choosing 1, maybe 2, and letting them take root. You don't need to do everything today, you just need to begin. Because the most important truth of all is this: you are not a finished story. You are still being written, even now, and your brain, this quiet, loyal companion, is waiting to be called forward, waiting for you to believe that something new is still possible. You see, my dear friend, it's never been about reversing time. Time, after all, has its own wisdom. The lines on your face, the softness in your step, the pause before a name. These are not failures. They are pages in a story well lived. What we're reclaiming here isn't youth, it's vitality. It's the quiet courage to stay awake in your own life, to greet each day not as something to survive, but as something to engage with curiosity, with tenderness, and yes, even with trembling hands. There's a kind of beauty that only comes with age, but it's easy to miss when we stop believing we can still grow. That belief, no matter how small, becomes the lantern we carry through the dimming halls of forgetfulness. It lights up what remains. It makes room for what might still be. And so, if a part of you is wondering whether it's too late to learn something new, to change a habit, to remember better, to feel more alive, I want you to know it's not. Even if you begin today with only one new breath, one short walk, one whispered affirmation into your morning tea, that is enough. That is movement. That is life. Because when the world around you slows, when others assume you are fading, your soul, that ancient radiant force inside you, still whispers, "Not yet. I am not finished." And if you keep listening, keep honoring that voice, then one morning, like me, you will look into the mirror, and instead of seeing an old face, you will see a spark that says, "I am still becoming."